Today we're going to talk about everything that is hidden in plain sight. That's right, we're talking about camouflage. So let's not waste any time. Let's get straight down to the painting table and let's start painting some camouflage on an Armoured Sentinel. Let's go. Alright, so here we are down at the painting table. Now a lot of this scheme is going to be dry brushed. So we've got paper towel, our palette, and obviously our undercoated model here. This one I've undercoated in Chaos Black just to make it simple. It's an old Armoured Sentinel from the Astra Militarum range. And we're actually going to paint this one up in the colours of the Armageddon Steel Legion, which I'll chuck it up here. It's actually an old painting recipe, and I've just converted it to be into the new colours. So first things first, over our Chaos Black undercoat, we're going to go in and dry brush 1 or 2 coats of Dawnstone. Now, I know I said 2 coats of dry brushing, and a lot of people are probably thinking, what's going on here? I like to mix my dry brushes up with a little bit of water. It just helps to make them release from the brush a little bit easier. So you can carry a bit less paint on your brush, making your dry brushes a little bit cleaner and smoother. They don't get that dry, gritty, textured look that you normally would if you were to go straight into the paint. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start lightly covering it, focusing right on all those hard edges. I really want those hard edges to be covered. And this is where maybe applying 2 coats is a better idea, because you can really start focusing and feathering those edges into the panels. And then when you give it a second pass, you're enhancing that hard edge and then just feathering it onto the panel to give it a really nice soft grey appearance. Now, if you go a little bit heavy as I did just there, you can use your finger straight away just to wipe it off, and it won't affect the finish. So now that that's done, it's not going to take long to dry at all. About 30 seconds and it's dry. It's fantastic stuff. I've gone over this and given it 2 coats. As you can see, it's come up really nice on those hard edges and got a light dusting on the flats. We're now going to grab our Nurgling Green. I know it sounds unusual, but when you actually translate it from the old colours to the new, this is the closest colour. It looks very, very green when we put it on the palette, but you will be surprised once we actually put it on our model. So here I am with my makeup brush that I use as a dry brush. It's just a simple smudging brush. I find it's got some really nice soft bristles and it handles the paint really well. So what we're going to do, we're going to prep that dry brush now, and we're actually going to start roughly drawing in our lines. So we don't want to do the whole thing. We just want to have some lines, some streaks coming down. So what I've done, I've gone a little bit heavier on the brush and just come in just where I can lightly put on these lines and draw the rough shape of my camouflage. I don't want to go too heavy, but I don't want to go too light either. You can already see straight away this is looking really, really good and highly contrasts the rest of the darkness of that model. So what we'll do, we'll draw in a few stripes here and we'll come back to you and show you what it's like at the end. So with our Nurgling Green now dry brushed on, you can see that this camouflage pattern is already starting to pop and the model already looks mostly finished. And for a vehicle, you want something like this that's really quick and simple to get on. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to our metals. So what I've done here, I've grabbed my lead belcher. We're going to paint everywhere that we think is metal on the model. So the pistons on the legs, the ball joints in the feet area, the tips of the antenna, the exhaust stacks, and anything else you find that you believe is metal on your model. So we're going to go ahead, we'll chuck 2 coats of lead belcher down on this now, and we'll come back once it's dry. So as you can see, we've got three really poppy contrasting colours on this model. What we could do now is just paint the base, chuck it down on the board, call it done. It's a battle ready model, but we're going to take it further because we love painting these models. We're going to mix up our normal wash that we would use on our metals here. So that's a 50-50 mix of known oil and Agrax Earthshade. What I normally do, I normally then thin this out with another 50% water. But here, I'm only going to add one brush load just to slightly break that tension down in the paint and make it flow just a little bit better. So what we'll do here, we've got it all mixed up, we're ready to go. I'm using my wash palette rather than working straight out of the bottles, because that way I can't tip it, I can't make a mess in my painting area, and I can't waste my material. So what we're doing, we're grabbing it, we're going to chuck a moderate coating of this stuff on. We don't want it running everywhere, but we want it over everything. We want it in those recesses. We want it to sit nice. But like I said, we don't want it to run and cause streaks. So at the moment, our washers are still wet, but we're not going to let that stop us from continuing work on this model. What we're actually going to do now, we're going to play a little bit funny and work on another area of the model. This is going to be the glass, such as the two windows on the front, the windows on the side, and just anything else that you believe is glass. Maybe it's the lighting area on the roof, maybe it's the light on the front of the fuselage. What we'll do, we'll grab some Cantor Blue. Mine's already mixed up with a bit of water, but you should mix yours up with water as normal. And we'll take a really fine brush. Here I've got a 3-0 brush, and I'm just going to apply 2 good coats to all that glass area. With our glass area now done, it's given our washers enough time to dry. And as you can see, it's really changed the colours of the model. It's really started to lift it beyond just a gaming piece now. And what we're going to do, we're actually going to focus in these pistons here and try and make it look like there's a little bit of oil residue, leaky oil there. So what we've got, our wash over here that we used before, and we're actually not going to darken it up with wash. We're going to add just a small brush load of a Baden black to it. This will thicken your wash up just a little bit so it stands out from the wash that we've already done and make it look a bit more like a thicker oil. What's really good is that you can then test it on the side of your palette and get it to a consistency you want by adding more water or adding more paint to the mix. Once you've got it, just use your thumbnail, just to test the consistency and make sure you're happy before you take this to the model. Being so dark and going into these recesses, it can be hard to pull it back if you get it wrong. So just make sure you test it first, and then what we'll do around the tops of the pistons, we'll put a thin line of it, and then we will start feathering it down the piston, just to try and create a little bit more weathering and life to this model. So with our detailing wash now done from before, we're going to move back to these glass areas. We've still got our wet base coat for our glass on the palette, and what we're going to do, we're going to add a bit of Administratum grey to it to lighten it up. That's right, Administratum grey, not white. This gives it a little bit of a cooler lift rather than a stark lift that a white normally would. So we'll mix that up. I've just added about a brush load and just started working it into the palette. And as you can see, I've created 3 separate colours. I've still got my original base colour. I've now created a new secondary colour and a third lighter colour. So I'm going to take from this secondary colour here, and what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to paint the whole top half of this lens in, and I'm just going to leave about the bottom quarter of it in that original dark blue. So now that we've done that and let that dry, we're going to pick up our lighter of the three shades here. And we're going to go over roughly the top half of the lens area. So we're going to go almost in a crescent moon shape and start just below the halfway, take it all the way around the top, and then sort of arc it up just above that halfway mark so that like I said, we get a bit of a crescent moon happening. On these rectangle windows, this is where we have to determine where our light source is coming from. So if we've got the light source coming from where my paint palette is, we're actually going to leave the opposite side darker and just do it more on the right hand side there in the top corner and come about a third of the way out from that corner. So do a bit of an L shape on those windows and it can look really, really, really nice then. So as you can see, that's really starting to look nice and give it some great details. But we're going to take it just another step further here. And we're going to grab our Administratum Grey and add that to our light mix on our palette. So what we want is we want a super light blue-grey. It almost needs to look like Administratum Grey, just with a hint of blue in it. Just start mixing it and you'll be able to judge when it's right. There's no sort of guide to this. It's all judging from your own eye when you think the shade is right. Wash your brush out so you have a super fine point for this, because this is super detailed. And we're going to paint a really fine, almost like a freehand highlight crescent moon, just around the very top edge of these round glass panels. And on the square ones, we're going to pick the very, very top right corner and keep it very structured to that right hand side. What I didn't do here and show is that I actually put a little reflection dot on the bottom left of the round lights, just to give that illusion that the glass is reflective. I know it's a lot of effort, but let's just go one final step and grab some white scar. And all this is going to be, I'm not even going to water this down. I want to have full control of this. And all this will do is be a tiny little dot highlight, just maybe slightly bigger than a dot, just in that top right corner of the circular glass and in the very top right corners of our glass windows on our cab of our Sentinel. It's a lot of effort for these small areas, but gee, does it really sell the effect at the end. So we're now about halfway through our model, and as you can see, this is looking really, really detailed now, and we've put very little effort into it. By doing the glass the way we've done it, we've actually created the illusion of a light being up here in this sort of direction. So what we're going to do now, we're going to bring some black in and just go over some little simple details like the mass of these antennas, the little hoses on the top of the calf joints on the backs of the legs there, and just give them a coat of black just to neaten those areas up. We're not going to do anything else apart from this in these areas, so just make sure you get a really good coat on now. Alright, so what I'm doing now, I'm going to start working on the base, and we're going to mix up our own dirty grey as a 50-50 mix of Dryad Bark and Mechanicus Standard Grey. And we're just going to apply that to all the textured areas that are on the top and around the base. So this base, I've actually made it following my Hobby 101 Basics tutorial series. I'll chuck a link in the description below. So anywhere that I'd put Astro Granite down to sort of blend the surfaces together and hide some other areas, things like that, that's where I'm going to use this color. So I'll chuck it down now and we'll come back while it's still wet and move on to the next colour. So you want to be super quick here because like I said, I like working wet on wet with my bases just to get the blends of those edges really nice and smooth. I've grabbed some Abaddon Black and I'm actually mixing that in with my previous grey mix. And we're going to coat up all the top of this cork area here to make it look a bit like asphalt. So we'll go through, we'll give it one really good coat of this stuff. It is a base, it's not a model. So this is an area where you can get away with just giving it one coat and having that patchy look to make it look a little bit more natural compared to the clinical look of your miniature. So what I've done now, I've grabbed some Mornfang Brown and we're going to base coat these flooring tiles, or maybe it's a gantry. Who knows? It's your world. Make it up as you go. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to take it right down to that grey. Now, if the two meet and touch, it doesn't matter. We want them to blend really well. And we'll just cover all this area. We're going to use this as a base coat for a deep rust. So not a super orange rust, more of a brownish side of rust. If you want to check out the video that I've done on rust, I'll chuck that in the description as well. Keeping on our rust theme, we're actually going to focus on these flooring tiles here. So we'll grab some Doomball Brown, but instead of painting this on like in my rust tutorial, we're actually going to start stippling from this point upwards. So I've grabbed my paper towel across, I'm wiping it really well into my bristles. It's going to be a medium to heavy stipple. We don't want to cover all of that Mornfang Brown. We're using that as our base for our rust. This is just to start really emphasizing that there is rust there. It's up to you how far you want to go with this. At the end of the day, I'm actually going to go over it with other paints anyway. So any mistakes you make now aren't a big deal if you want to follow this tutorial. If you want to go a little bit heavier with your rust, great. Go and follow the other tutorial that I've chucked down in the link below about just doing a plain, simple, straight up rust. So seeing as that stippling doesn't need any time at all to dry, we can just grab some Scrag Brown now and just work this up. So we'll go a little bit lighter than the previous coat and just stipple this on the main areas where you think that rust is going to form the heaviest. So this could be the little corners there, the edges where people may have walked, things like that. Wherever you think the rust will have formed, that's where you want to apply this colour. So in order to complete this rust now, I've grabbed some Troll Slayer Orange and I'm just going to go super light, just emphasising those areas where that Scrag Brown has collected the most. So this is going to be very, very patchy. It's going to be very few and far between. I don't want to turn the whole thing orange. I just want to pick up the heaviest areas of rust with this. Don't forget to go around at the same time and do your pipes and your beams that you may have stuck around, whatever other stuff you've got there that's in metal. Make sure you're hitting this in at the same time as the floor. What I've done here, I've grabbed some Rakarth flesh. I want that to be the colour of my flooring. And I'm actually going to stipple this sort of mediumly over the top. Ideally, you could use your stippling brush. Just keep testing how much paint is coming off your brush as you apply it. Keep spreading it out and spreading it over the top. We don't want this to be even. Alternatively, the other thing you could do is grab a bit of a packing sponge that some miniatures may come with. Games Workshop have sort of moved away from this process of chucking foam in with their blister packs and that, but I know there are some other miniatures, or the foam's easy enough to just grab from anywhere that you can buy foam. It's just sort of an aerated soft foam, like in a miniature case. What we're going to do now, we're going to grab some Balthasar gold and pick out our cabling. In my case, I've used guitar strings. You may have used paper clips, you may have used actual wires. Whatever that is, just grab it now with the Balthasar gold. It's a deeper gold. It's not as bright as Liberator gold, but it still has that warmth to it. It gives it that sort of dated look. And we'll just hit all this now, let it dry, and we can move on and start looking at washing this base. So with that now dry, what we're going to do, we're going to bring our Agrax Earthshade back in and our wash palette here. And we're actually going to take it just straight out of the pot into the palette. Get a fair bit out because it is a large base, being 80mm to cover. But I'm not going to mix it with water at all. I'm just going to put this straight on. And this is the one time where I will say, go as heavy as you want. Go nuts. If it pulls, it pulls. It doesn't matter. It's a base. It's all part of the effect. It's all part of your world. So let's get that on and let's get that base drying now. So I've grabbed some Stormhost Silver now. We're going to actually start highlighting our metal. Now we've set our direction before with our glass, so we're going to sort of follow that and just highlight those higher areas, those raised areas that are the same direction as your source of light. We don't need to highlight every single part of metal on this model. Just those super raised areas. It will save you a lot of time, but still give the emphasis of highlighting. So let's go ahead and do it just like what I'm doing here. What we'll do, we'll also do it on our model. So with the model, we do the top of the exhaust stacks, the top of the antennas, around those couple of sharp little points of your ankle balls if you really want to go that far. But at the end of the day, we can keep it fairly minimal and just focus, like I said, on those super sharp, super high, detailed areas. So with our metal now highlighted, we're virtually now done. This thing is looking fantastic. There's still a couple of little details though that I'd like to get. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in my Mephiston Red now, and there's just 3 little sensor dots on the front of this carapace of the cockpit or cabin. I'm just going to pick them out, and we're going to continue along and do them a little bit like our glass or lens, just to give them a little bit of interest. So we'll do our side squad marking panel at the same time while we've got this paint out. In this case, I want it to be a red squadron, so we'll coat that in now. Give it 2 good coats just so it's a nice solid colour. So with that red drying pretty quickly, we'll move on a little bit further here. I've done the same thing as before with my lenses, but instead of using the Administratum grey, I've actually grabbed white because I do want these to go that slightly pinkier hue rather than a greyish hue. So I'm just going to do that now. I've got 2 separate mixes there, so I've got a bit of a mid-tone and a light tone, and I'm not going to push these ones any higher than that. I'm going to leave it there. They are so small, it is actually hard to notice the detail, but it is worth every effort. While we're on our red, I've actually grabbed some Troll Slayer orange and mixed that in with my Mephiston red, just to save including other colours and new paints and that. We've already got our Troll Slayer orange there. So I've just added that back in and just highlighted all the way around this red panel. What I'll then do is just add a little bit more Troll Slayer orange and pick out the top right corner. So with our washes on our base now dry, I'm going to go back in and start focusing on those bases again. I'm getting a super dry brush of Mechanica Standard Grey here over all that area I want to imply is an asphalt or, you know, a bitumen or something like that. And I'm just giving it the lightest dry brush to pick up the surfaces of that texture, nothing more. I've grabbed some Skaven Blight Dinge and set it up on my dry brush, and we're going to now dry brush all this texture, the Astro Granite that we placed onto our base, just to start picking it back up again from that dirty wash. So we've got that super dirty, grimy Agrax Earthshade wash that ties the whole base together, and now we're just going to lighten it back up just to create that illusion of different textures, different surfaces, different colors, things like that. Now that we've finished that dry brush, I'm actually going to come in with some Storm Vermin Fur and just super lightly pick up the highest points of that texture just to give it some good depth. So let's go around and let's get that done now, and I'll come back to you when it's done. What I've done, I've grabbed some Karak stone here, and I'm using this just to tie the whole base together again, like what we did with our Agrax Earthshade wash. So what I've done, I've set my dry brush up, gone super dry with it. I'm going to focus on these textured areas first so they draw more paint out of the brush again. If I have to reload it, I'm going to go super light, and again focus on textured areas first. Then I'll move on to my floor plates, and then finally I'll just give a very light dusting over our asphalt areas. So what I've got here, I've got a plasma gun that I've magnetized for this, and I'm just going to come in with some Mechanica Standard Grey and just pick out the edges of each of the ribbing on the pipe along here. Once I've done that, I've also got a las cannon which has got bunched cables, and I will use this brush just to brush in one direction. In my case, I've gone downwards across those ribbed cables, just in a dry brushing method, just to pick them up and give them a little bit of a lift compared to the recesses. So we'll go ahead and we'll highlight each of these, and then we'll do that little light dry brush, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so here we go. We've got some Ardcoat here. We're going to put some transfers on this model. It's not something that I've done a lot of myself. It's not something that we see a lot of people use. So I want to go over and do this the correct way. Now I want to put a model number, member number on our squad color there. And I also want to choose a position. And I think I might go for this panel. So what I'm going to do is put an Ardcoat gloss varnish over those areas where we're going to put our decals. Don't water this stuff down. Just put one good coat on it. That'll be enough. Wash your brush out. Let it dry. I've got my decal sheet here, and I'm picking the Steel Legion decal up in the top corner. I'm going to cut fairly close to it, as close as I can without cutting the actual decal. And then I'll also pick a unit number down below. In this case, I went with number 2. So I've got a great new product here that I've actually tried out for the first time. It's the Vallejo Decal Fix and Decal Medium. Here we've got the decal fix. So it's like using a decal glue that you brush on. So what I've done, I've put that on my palette, and I'm just going to cover the whole area where I put my gloss varnish earlier. So we'll just put a good coat on this. We'll let it dry for a couple of minutes. Try and keep it nice and smooth so it doesn't sort of run everywhere. It is fairly thin, but you also don't want it to go on lumpy and leave a texture behind. So let's chuck that on now. Let's let it dry for a couple of minutes and we'll get on to actually applying our decals. Alright, I've grabbed a pair of tweezers and we're going to put these decals into some water. I've actually filled the center of my wash tray with water because it's nice and deep, but also not massive, so it's nice and easy for working with these decals. We'll leave them in there for about 30 to 35 seconds, and once we're done, we can pull them out with the tweezers and put them on our models. So we'll let them soak and we'll come back in a second. Rightio, it's been about 30 seconds now, so the decals are ready to go on. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use my tweezers to carefully pull the decal out and hopefully not drop it like I just did. And we'll pick it up, we'll orientate it in our hands how we want to, and then take it over to the model, the area you want the decal. Now, I'm doing this awkwardly so I could show you on the camera better. But grab a brush, a good clean, soft brush, grab your decal, and then gently slide the decal sheet out from underneath the decal, leaving it behind on the surface. You'll have a few seconds to quickly maneuver your decal where you want it before it starts to stick. So just go ahead and do that now with both your decals, maneuver them around, and then we'll just let them dry for a couple of minutes before moving on to the next step. Alright, so we've given that a couple of minutes to dry and we're going to bring this stuff in. This is Vallejo Decal Softener, and this stuff is fantastic. It actually helps mold your decals to the shapes of your model. So just put a drop on your palette and then straight away pick it up with your brush and just go over that decal. And what we want to do, we want to leave it about 30 seconds to actually dry and do its thing. So I've left it about 30 seconds now and I've come back in with a clean brush and I'm just going to lightly brush and roll the brush as I go. So what I'm doing, I'm pushing it around that edge there and around the top right corner. Unfortunately, in the last iteration, the Sentinel kit came with slightly larger numbers than the original kits. So normally you wouldn't have to do this, but in this case we do just have to get that decal to shape to the model. This plasma cannon, it's a bit lackluster. It feels like it's missing something. That's right, the coils, so let's do them in a blue now. We'll grab some Calendar Sky. This is a great base coat for a blue plasma glow. We'll give this 2 really good thin coats over all those plasma coils in there. We'll let it dry fully before we move on to the next step, which involves a couple of coats of dry brushing. So with our Calendar Sky now dry, we're going to bring in some Lotham Blue. We need our brightest blue that we can get for this step. And we're going to bring a very fine brush in here and sort of dry brush over the top of it, just very, very lightly. Now I have got a glove on here because I've ducked outside and put a matte varnish on the main Sentinel body itself so that I can show you the final step once it's dry while I'm doing this. So let's go ahead and do that now, and then we can go on and give our final dry brush to this bit and call the model almost completely finished. So what I've done now, I've grabbed some white scar and I've got not much of this on the brush at all. It's a really light dry brush. Starting off with those outer corners, I'm going to just give them a quick couple of passes and then just slowly work the middle of the top up. Then, as I get less and less paint on the brush, I'm just going to give it a few more passes, especially on those outer edges to create that sharpness on the square shape of it. And then just go until you feel like it's bright enough and white enough. And that looks great, and it's super simple and effective to do. Here we are, we're at the end. We've actually painted our model. I've taken it outside and I've put a matte varnish on to protect that coating. And we're going to come back in with our hard coat here. And we're going to use this very, very selectively just to go over our lenses and our windows. So just grab a bit of your hard coat, just paint that whole area in where your lens is. And we'll let it dry, and it'll just give it that nice contrast between the matte finish of the model and the gloss finish of the lenses and glass. With that now done, you can see we've fully completed our Sentinel. You can see it's on a nice detailed base that sort of lends to the colour scheme. We've got our different textures there between our glass and our matte finish, and we've got our camouflage that looks fantastic. So we've also put our hard coat on the glow of the plasma cannon, but as you can see, that's looking great once you've got the weapons on. They really do add to this model. And as simply as pulling it off and attaching our las cannon cells and our las cannon itself, you can quickly and easily swap some loadouts. So if you guys want to see how to magnetize your models, drop a comment below and we can actually teach you a really quick and easy method of magnetizing. So as you can see, camouflage is super simple. You don't have to use the colors that I've used here. You can pick whatever color you want. You know, you got your Cadians with your greens and creams. You've got your Catechins with your more yellowy color, green and black. At the end of the day, it's the process that stays the same. You can use this for the Ash Wastes as well, so it's ideal for Necromunda. I know they're in the Ash Waste books, there are some vehicles already done up in camouflage and they look fantastic. So this would be a perfect place to start. So come along for the journey. Next week we've got something really exciting coming. We hope you like this one, and we hope you guys are going to start painting your vehicles in some really cool camouflage to hide them in plain sight. Till next time, have a good one, guys. See ya.